Good evening, everyone. Time for episode 22 of Kerr's Rage, part 1 of the Duaredheim Staff Saga, by me. Starting on page 231, the chapter about Myfanwy, the Witch of the Woods, who has just been mortally wounded by Urg, the Red Orc War Master. Once Urg had fired his first volley of bolts against the witch, he knew that they had won. Within moments, the tangling vines had released their prisoner, for the most part unharmed, and he had been able to deliver the finishing blow to the witch. He held some remorse for the crumpled hag, for the battle had been such a short and unsatisfying one. Their victory hadn't been absolute, for they had suffered several casualties of their own. The witch's fires had injured Jawl, and Tooth and Nail had become so witless that they had to be led back to the clearing by Grip and Chomp. Claw searched the witch's home. Examining her belongings as only a fellow magician could, he soon found the object of their search. Along with the scepter, he gathered up some of her parchments and scrolls that he thought were of importance. Among the Red Orcs, only those learned in magic could read at all, and he was special in that he could read in both the common tongue of men and the language of the Lael Selfar. After reading through some of her work, he was certain that they had found that which Lycurgus sought. "Urg, we found it. This is the device that the Dark Elf seeks. We must bring it to him as soon as possible. We'll leave as soon as we finish the search. Keep looking. There may be more." And while Claw searched inside, Fang delved outside, and Sudi found the hag's wine cellar. Inside he found a good store of fresh meat, nuts, and other foods, as well as 2 kegs of strong ale. And while orcs are fond of battle and mating, they are particularly fond of the foods of men, possessing a driving passion for strong ale and other drink. This was despite the fact that they could survive on bugs, raw meat of all kinds, and even coarser fare. "Grip, Chomp, build a fire," Fang said. "We'll feast to our victory." "We've no time for feasting," Claw said. "There's no telling who might be following us." "The scouts kept watch over our back trail and found nothing," Urg said. "An hour of food and drink will give us strength for the trail. Full bellies will hasten the march." "We should search the surrounding forest for danger." "Nonsense. Tooth and Nail need rest before the move. Warriors, we feast." With the final decision made, they roasted the witch's well-salted meat over the cook fire. "The ale is excellent," Fang said. "It must be dwarven, because it is strong." And although dwarves were an enemy to be slain on sight, they did brew a fine drink. Even Claw felt compelled to try it, and soon he was filling his bowl with more ale and then more meat. From and Gom returned after a brief excursion. "There is no danger nearby. We searched the forest all around." Helping themselves to the provisions that the witch left for them, they soon grew quite full and rather drunk. Tooth's single canine had picked up a long string of meat, and he drank on, oblivious to his condition. Claw told them all the story of his grandfather Bone, and of his brave escape from capture at the hands of several dwarven miners. "I should tell you all about my prized sow," Urg said. "I killed 3 rival males while courting her, and she has given me 11 fine children." And all his company was quite impressed. "I wish I was home in our cave right now." "If we can't have women," Fang said, "at least we can drink ale." In this manner, the orcs passed the night, telling tales of old battles, mating, rape, and other goblin horrors. It was nearly dawn before they all passed out. They slept well, for they were confident that they would be richly rewarded once they returned with their prize. Tariq Longstride had fought against the orcs for most of his life. When he was just a boy of 10, the orcs raided his village. During the attack, his mother hid him in the loft of his cabin. There he went unnoticed while he looked on in terror as she was raped and his father killed. His 2 younger sisters were taken, and he never saw them again. When the orcs had finished their raid and left with what suited them, he crept down from his hiding place. His limbs trembled with weakness, for he was filled with the incomprehensible fear that children possess when their loved ones are lost to them. His mother was still alive when he reached her, but her fragile body was broken, and she died in his arms without uttering a word. When he gained enough courage to leave his home, he discovered that his village was dead. Those who had resisted the orcs had been butchered, and those who had not were taken away as slaves. It took him a long time to realize that he was truly alone. He tried to think of what his parents would have done had they been in his place, but at 10, he had no way of knowing, no way of even comprehending it. And that night, he slept in the barn to escape the dead, and though his dreams were plagued with endless nightmares, he awoke to a greater horror. Not only did the dawn bring with it the sun, but it also spawned vultures, ravens, coyotes, and wolves. The animals ran about the village, pecking at the bloated dead bodies and tearing at their flesh. His fear was great, and he cried uncontrollably. He knew that he had to stop the desecration, but he was too small to bury the dead and too young to fight the scavengers. But he was an intelligent boy, and he realized that his parents were no longer there to help him. If he were to survive, then he would have to do it alone. And so he returned to his home for the last time. Hefting his father's travel pack, he stuffed it full of what provisions he would find. Lifting his father's bow from its hook by the door, he carried out his quiver of arrows and his dad's great hunting knives. Taking their flint and striker from the hearth, he then lit a fire there. Assembling all their lanterns together, he emptied their oil all about the house, removed a torch from its sconce on the wall, and lit it. He then lit his parents and his home on fire. No animals would eat of their flesh or torture their bodies ever again. He left no building of his village untouched by fire, and all the animals of the wild fled from it. Saving goodbye to his family and his people, he left. He survived. From that day forward, he named all orcs his sworn enemies, and from that moment, his entire life had been dedicated to seeking vengeance against them. But his heart, if injured, was good by nature, and he would always be kind to animals and good to his fellow man. He'd spent his early years alone, surviving in the forested valleys that surrounded the place of his birth, and for many years the only words that he spoke were to the animals of the woods, the sun, and the wind. The creatures taught him how to hide, hunt, and survive, and they gave him companionship in his small world without people. But as he grew older, he ranged more widely, and he discovered settlements of men in Laos Alfar, and his dealings with them were a little different from a wild wolf trying to beg strips of meat from a camper's fire. But in time, he remembered how to communicate, and he walked among them more often, but he always felt the most at home beneath the sun and the stars. In the world of men, he found his skills were valued in the wild world outside of civilization, and he was often employed as a scout for merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers. It was during those years that those he led began calling him Ranger, and he thought that it was a good name. When he could, he found work in regions where he would most likely find the orcs, and many of them fell to his arrows, knives, and sword. Always did he search for his lost sisters, but they were either dead or far away. And so it was that he found himself leading Carmen's party after the orcs, and if any man or elf understood their ways, he did, and he called upon that knowledge as he tracked them through the heavily forested valleys of the Ogrefangs. When he could, he instructed his fellows in the ways of the orcs. The red orcs are the fiercest of enemies, Kalor. They seem more like goblins than men, but their primitive minds are unmistakably human. Do they believe in gods like us? They are superstitious and simple. We will call their god the Beast. They seem organized, like our own armies. Their tribes are led by the strongest among them, or one stronger than they. They are hunters, but they know what it means to be hunted. They can conceal themselves and remain hidden for days with little movement in order to ambush their prey. They can build ingenious traps to ensnare the largest animals, and they've borrowed the weapons lore of many other cultures. The orcs at Nordtown were the first that I've ever seen. Their natural weapons seemed formidable enough. They're not above using their teeth and claws in a fight, but they always prefer to use some hand weapon. Their bones and skin are thicker and tougher than ours, and their muscles are corded and sinewy like a bear's. But make no mistake, it is their brains that make them the most dangerous. Do not underestimate them. They are quick to solve problems in a fight. I hope that my skills are their equals should we meet them. We may yet find out. I must ride ahead and search for sign. The rocks here had given them a chance to lose us. Using all his knowledge and more, he found their trail and studied their strength from what it could tell. He searched ahead in case the orcs had discovered them and prepared an ambush. It was best that he lead them, for his eyes had been trained through decades to notice anything out of place in the forest. The path that they followed was difficult for riders on horseback. Brambles and fallen trees blocked it in many places, and he often had to find alternate routes and then regain the orcs' trail. But regardless of the difficulties, he always returned unfalteringly to their path. Traveling until nightfall, they camped in a sheltered ravine. "I'll stand the watch tonight," Tariq said. "I won't be able to sleep until we've found them." "No, Tariq," Carmen said. "We should take shifts." "Shifts or no, sleep I will not. Suit yourself, but if dreams start to take you, wake me." "I dream only nightmares when I'm trailing them." "I hate the orcs for what they are," Kerr said. "But someday, Tariq, you must tell us why you hate them." Tariq grew suddenly quiet at that, and Kerr and his company tread no further. "Wake, friends," Tariq said. "The sun rises, and we must take to the trail before it grows cold." He seemed as refreshed as any of them, despite the fact that he hadn't slept for more than a day. "How does he do it?" D'Artagnan asked Leander. "He knows the woods much as I do, but even more he knows the hearts of our foes." By mid-morning they came to the edge of a great clearing, and there they found the orcs milling beneath the sheltering boughs of a mighty oak. No sentries were in sight, nor were they wearing their vestments of war. They could see the broken form of an elderly woman at the base of the tree, and beyond her was an open door. The orcs were laughing and seemed almost drunk. "Ha," Tariq thought, "they are drunk. Wait here and keep the horses quiet. I'll circle around and look for hidden guards." Finding none, he returned and led them stealthily to within a stone's throw of their campfire, and still the orcs hadn't noticed them. Readying their weapons, they waited for Carmen's signal. Alger tromped beneath her in anticipation of battle. "Steady, boy," she said, and her grip was firm on the reins and upon her halberd. Her armor no longer seemed cumbersome, but rather its weight was now comforting and protective. The sight of the woman's body sickened her, and the orcs reminded her of the despoilment of Nordtown. Her heart demanded justice, and if she had her way, then these beasts would never harm anyone again. With a tremendous shout, she let out her battle cry, "Vanamoinen, I fight for thee!" Spurring Alger forward and raising her pole arm, she led the attack. Tucking it tightly beneath her arm in the style of the joust, she charged. Her heart quickened to a steady beat, pulsing at the base of her throat, like the forging blows of a blacksmith's hammer. Her stomach churned with the anxiety of fighting an enemy that she knew little about, and she hoped that the techniques that she'd learned while fighting the jackals would be effective. Tariq rode behind her, his sword drawn. The dents and scratches left behind by many battles could be seen upon it. His face was locked in concentration. His jaws were tightly clenched, steel blue eyes burning with an unquenchable inferno of vengeance. The rest of the party dismounted. Running their horses into the safety of the trees, D'Artagnan and Leander sprinted towards the action. "We fight together this day," D'Artagnan said, "and may your God's blessing be upon us." Raising his shield, D'Artagnan hoped to catch any harmful barbs that might be launched his way, The ever-watchful eye of Odin stared out from it. His comrade dodged from tree to tree for cover, but their shields were never more than a sword's length apart from one another. Their blades reflected the morning sunlight, keen edges craving orc blood. Dow's arrows arched over their heads with deadly accuracy, and soon there was a terrible confusion among the orcs. Kerr's hysterical laughter and whooping cries could be heard pursuing them all, for a dwarf wasn't considered grown up until he'd killed an orc or two, and he'd hoped to do at least that. His short legs pumped beneath him with the might and rhythm of dwarven bellows, working hard to get him to the fight before it was through. Kalor searched for any spell that might help them, but his magic was mostly simple illusion, and he possessed little sorcery that was directly combative. He now wished that he knew the ways of Lyell Sulfur wizards. They could evoke the power of the elements, fire and lightning, and hurl it down upon their enemies. Struggling against the desire to use his other skills instead of sorcery, he finally decided that he could best help them with magic. Knowing that the element of surprise wouldn't last long, they could use all his help and more. Beside him, Dow fitted arrow after arrow to his bow and loosed them, firing them with the utmost skill. He released them in a controlled rage that was terrible to look upon. So great was his exertion that sweat fell in glittering lines down his fair-featured face, matting his hair about his forehead and neck. With the elf's protection, he wasn't afraid of interruption. Erg's command was as surprised as they had ever been. Cursing his juvenile foolishness, he wished that he listened to Claw's wisdom. But now wasn't the time for lamentation. They would have to act immediately, or they would be killed. The effects of the witch's brew had dulled their wits, leaving them caught in the open with little cover. But none of his warriors had fought in less than 10 battles, and they fought together in most of them. Knowing each other's strengths and weaknesses, they knew who was best with club or crossbow. They hadn't survived for this long without being greatly capable, and although they were little prepared when the attack came, they quickly sobered. Hastily donning suits of mail or bronze breastplates, they readied themselves as well as seconds would allow. From and Gom fired at the elves approaching them, but their drunkenness spoiled their shots. Jarl took a shaft in the throat and was dying quickly. Fang was struck in the left shoulder by an elfin barb, and the red rage of the berserk had taken him. Hefting his mighty war club, he charged 2 riders entering the clearing. Erg had to gain control fast. Calming himself, he quickly analyzed the maelstrom around him. His cool bravery steadied his men, and he barked orders with a deep baritone voice. From, Gom, fan out and flank them. Tooth and nail, take the elves on foot. Grip and chomp, slay the dwarf. Claw, attack the archer. Once his company was in motion, there was nothing left for him to do but join them. Lifting his club, he charged after Fang. Perhaps Fang would take the riders down, but he was reckless, and he doubted the likelihood of his success. Carmen Elise Anastasia, daughter of Sir William and Gwyneth, rode for all that she was worth. Alger's hooves turned like thunder against the forest floor, his mighty flanks driving them irresistibly toward the foremost orc. In seconds they would clash, and the victor would be decided. Dow's arrow had struck it, and the pain of the wound must have driven him crazy, because his jaw hung low, dripping a rabid froth. To clash head-on with such an unpredictable foe would be foolhardy, but she had trained her mind to remain clear despite the stress of battle. The orc was running straight at her, and she quickly calculated the best course of action. His speed was such that he wouldn't be able to redirect his attack easily, and so she waited until the last possible moment, and then reined Alger suddenly to the left. The orc's crushing blow landed harmlessly where they would have been. Keeping him off balance by circling and continuing to press toward his blind side, she kept her weapon arm ever toward him. Tariq let out a thunderous war cry as he rode past them, adding to the orc's rage and confusion. The berserk beast was armored with a breastplate that he must have stolen from among Nordtown's defenders. The arrow hadn't grievously hurt him, but the pain of his wound had driven him mad. His great canines protruded from his lower jaw, curving upward to nearly meet the level of his bloodshot eyes. Swinging his immense war club with no sign of fatigue, he rushed at Alge's flanks. They were hard-pressed to evade his deadly blows. Realizing that the berserk was not opposed to killing her horse in his attempt to reach her, she dismounted at a safe distance and faced the orc on foot. Sweat ran down her face, dampening her tunic, so she quickly wiped it away. Losing the fight because her own sweat blinded her was unacceptable. Shifting her weight forward onto the balls of her feet for balance, she brought her left leg back into a strong leaning stance like her father had taught her. Remaining in constant motion, she knew that reactions came swifter from a body that was already on the move. Watching her back through the reflection on her halbert's blade, she waited patiently for the right moment to act. The orc grunted in satisfaction. Finally, his opponent was within reach. Holding his club before him to aid in the momentum of his charge, he attacked. His iron-shod feet gripped the ground firmly and added to his power. Moving with the spirit of a raging bull, he needed no red flag to guide his anger. He would crush this human woman into the ground. Tariq galloped towards the orc's enormous leader. He realized how greatly this war master threatened them. The beast was the heart of the orc's company, and if he could stop that heart from beating, then the body would stop as well. Riding past him, Tariq dismounted, slapping Windrunner into the safety of the trees. Striding towards the orc, he spun his sword about himself to remember its familiar weight, and drew one of his father's razor-sharp hunting knives with his left. He was familiar with the sword and shield fighting style that D'Artan and Leander used, but he preferred the advantage of having another weapon at hand. Reaching an open area in the clearing, he stood ready, with his feet shoulder-width apart and his weapons held low to reduce fatigue. The metal studs of his armor shone with the morning's light, eyes piercing outward from beneath his brown huntsman's cap. He showed no sign of fear. This was a simple matter for him, for his desire to fight the orcs until his dying breath prevented any doubt from forming within him. In fact, fear never even occurred to him, because he always assumed that his hate-driven fury would achieve victory against any orc. The War Master stopped 5 paces from him. He lowered his club so that he could better see his unmoving antagonist. The elf stood a full head shorter than he did and weighed far less than 1/2 of his own weight. He concluded that this elf was either insane or a great fool, but whichever proved to be true, it would be a simple matter to crush him to death with his club. He had little time to spare for his command duties for dealing with this elf, and so he attacked first. Stepping forth with all his strength, he swung his club in a wide waist-high arc designed to tear the elf in half. So that's where we'll end on a cliffhanger. We'll start next episode 23 on page 241, continuing the battle. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, read Kerr's Rage, Part 1 of the Duaredheim Staff Saga, and the following novel, The Drums of Doom, and The Last Admiral, Part 3 of the Duaredheim Staff Saga, and The Ice Moon, coming soon. Thank you. Have a great night.